The quarry workers thought it was a bear. Let that sit for a second. 1856, Neander Valley, Germany. A group of workers blasting through limestone pull a skull out of the rock, a skull with a brain case bigger than yours or mine. Their first thought was bear. That tells you everything about where science was in 1856. Nobody had a category for what they were holding. A local teacher named Johann Karl Fulret took one look and understood something was wrong with that explanation. These were not animal bones. The proportions were wrong. The density was wrong. Skull was wrong. It was human, except it wasn't. It was both things at once, and nobody knew what to do with that. For the next 170 years, scientists argued about what those bones meant, what Neanderthals were, how they lived, why they disappeared. Some said they were a dead end, a failed experiment, a species that simply couldn't compete. Some said they were absorbed into us. They didn't disappear at all. They became us. The argument went in circles for over a century, and one institution changed everything, not with a theory, not with a new fossil. With a molecule extracted from a 50,000-year-old toe bone found in a cave in Siberia. Here's the thing about ancient DNA that most people don't fully appreciate. We are not supposed to be able to do this. DNA degrades. It breaks apart. It gets contaminated by every organism that touches the bones after death. Bacteria, fungi, every researcher who handles the specimen without gloves. By the time you reach a 40,000-year-old sample, less than 1% of the DNA you recover is actually from the original individual. The rest is noise. So when Svante Pääbo, working out of a Munich lab in 1997, decided he was going to extract usable DNA from the original Neanderthal bones found in that quarry, the scientific community's reaction was polite skepticism at best. He did it anyway. What he recovered was mitochondrial DNA. The small circular genome passed through the maternal line. Separate from the main nuclear genome, when he sequenced it, it was different from modern human mitochondrial DNA. Different enough that the mainstream interpretation was immediate and confident. Neanderthals were a separate species. No interbreeding, no genetic contribution to modern humans. They died out cleanly and completely. Case closed. That interpretation lasted 13 years. In 2006, Pääbo moved to the Max Planck Institute for Evolutionary Anthropology in Leipzig and started something that was, at the time, considered borderline impossible. He wanted the complete Neanderthal genome. All 3 billion base pairs. It's not just the mitochondrial sliver, the whole thing. I want you to understand what that actually required. The bones used for extraction came from Vindija Cave in Croatia. 3 female specimens. 38,000 years old. Day, half a gram of bone. Inside that half gram, shattered, degraded, contaminated DNA fragments, averaging 50 to 60 base pairs each. For context, the complete human genome is 3 billion base pairs long. They were working with fragments the size of a sentence trying to reconstruct an entire library. And less than 1% of what they recovered was actually Neanderthal. The team spent years building protocols to deal with this. Dedicated clean rooms where researchers wore full body suits. Computational tools built specifically to distinguish genuine ancient sequences from contamination. Methods to identify and remove the DNA of every researcher who had ever touched the specimens. In February 2009, Pääbo announced the first draft was complete. In May 2010, it was published in Science. And what it said ended 13 years of scientific consensus in a single paragraph. The 2010 paper did not just sequence the genome, it compared it. 5 modern humans, 1 from France, 1 from China, 1 from Papua New Guinea, 2 from Africa. It's side by side with the Neanderthal. And the comparison showed something that the 1997 mitochondrial study had completely missed. The French genome carried Neanderthal DNA. The Chinese genome carried Neanderthal DNA. The Papua New Guinean genome carried Neanderthal DNA. The 2 African genomes did not. Between 1 and 4% of the genome of every non-African person alive today is Neanderthal. Not metaphorically, not approximately, literally, measurably, sequentially, Neanderthal. Which means the story of Neanderthal extinction is not a story of one species replacing another. It is a story of 2 populations meeting, living alongside each other, and having children together. For thousands of years, the children survived. Their descendants are alive today. You may be one of them. Now here is where it gets genuinely strange. When the Max Planck team started mapping exactly where in the modern human genome the Neanderthal sequences had landed, they found something they did not expect. The Neanderthal DNA was not random, was concentrated in certain regions. And in other regions, large stretches of the genome, there was none. Zero. Researchers called these regions Neanderthal deserts. And when they looked at what genes lived in those deserts, what biological functions those regions controlled, a pattern emerged. Brain development, cognitive function, the X chromosome, genes expressed in the testes. These were the regions where Neanderthal DNA had been purged completely from the modern human genome. Not gradually, over thousands of years of random drift. Actively removed by natural selection. Because when Neanderthal versions of those genes ended up in a modern human body, the result was less viable offspring. Lower fertility, reduced survival. The hybrid children who carried Neanderthal variants in those regions left fewer descendants. Over generations, disappeared. What this means is uncomfortable but important. Neanderthals and modern humans were not fully compatible. They were close enough to produce children, but not close enough that all of those children thrived equally. The biology was fighting itself. The 2018 paper from Max Planck made that picture even clearer. By that point, they had sequenced 5 additional Neanderthal genomes, 8 total, from Belgium, France, Croatia, Russia, and when they compared those 8 individuals from different sites, different time periods, spread across thousands of kilometers, they found something that explained a great deal. The genetic differences between a Belgian Neanderthal and a Siberian Neanderthal were smaller than the genetic differences between 2 modern humans from the same village. Think about what that means. The entire Neanderthal population across all of Europe and Western Asia was less genetically diverse than a single modern human neighborhood. The effective breeding population at any given time was estimated at between 3,000 and 12,000 individuals, total, across the entire Neanderthal range, across hundreds of thousands of square kilometers. That is not a thriving species. That is a population that is already in trouble. A population that's small cannot purge harmful mutations efficiently. Deleterious variants accumulate, pass from parent to child. Build up across generations. By the time modern humans arrived in Europe around 45,000 years ago, the Neanderthals were already carrying a genetic burden that no external event was required to explain. We're already declining from within. In 2024, researchers at Berkeley, using the Max Planck genome data as their foundation, published a new timeline of the interbreeding. They analyzed the length of Neanderthal DNA segments preserved in hundreds of modern human genomes. Longer segments mean more recent interbreeding. Shorter segments mean older interbreeding. The map they built showed something that changed the texture of the story completely. The main period of interbreeding between modern humans and Neanderthals lasted approximately 7,000 years. Not a brief encounter, not a handful of isolated events. 7,000 years of ongoing contact. To populations living close enough that interbreeding was a regular occurrence across dozens of generations. For 7,000 years, these were not strangers. Then in February 2026, a study published in Science added one final detail that reframes everything. The interbreeding was not equal in both directions. It was strongly sex-biased. Male Neanderthals with female modern humans far more often than the reverse. The evidence is in one specific absence. The Neanderthal Y chromosome, which passes exclusively from father to son, is completely absent from every modern human genome ever sequenced. It's not rare, not uncommon. Gone. Every modern human on Earth, regardless of how much Neanderthal ancestry they carry, has a Y chromosome that is entirely modern human in origin. The reason the researchers identified is specific. The Neanderthal Y chromosome carried immune gene variants that were incompatible with the modern human female immune system. When a Neanderthal man fathered a child with a modern human woman, her immune system recognized the fetus carrying a Neanderthal Y chromosome as foreign. The pregnancy was more likely to fail. Sons born of Neanderthal fathers and modern human mothers were less likely to survive. And without surviving sons, a Y chromosome has no path forward. It vanished. Not because Neanderthal men never tried, because the biology said no. So here is the actual answer to who the Neanderthals were. They were not a separate species in any clean biological sense. They interbred with our ancestors across 7,000 years and produced children whose descendants are alive today. They were not the brutish, stooped, dim-witted creatures that 19th century science imagined. Their genome carries variants of the FOXP2 gene associated with the capacity for complex language. Their archaeological record shows ochre pigment, personal ornaments, evidence of caring for injured individuals across multiple years of survival. They were not robust enough to survive indefinitely. Their population was too small, too inbred, too genetically fragile long before we arrived. They did not go extinct in any conventional sense. They were absorbed slowly, imperfectly, over millennia. Their genes that helped modern humans adapt to European winters, to the cold, to low sunlight, to new pathogens were kept. Their genes that conflicted with modern human biology, the Y chromosome, the variants in the Neanderthal deserts, were lost. What remained was not Neanderthal. But it was not purely modern human either. It was what happens when two populations that are almost identical spend 7,000 years finding out exactly how much that almost matters. The answer, it turns out, is not as much as the difference, but enough. Enough that the deserts formed. Enough that the Y chromosome vanished. Enough that the population that came out the other side was something new. Something that looked entirely modern human, but carried folded quietly into its genome the faintest record of the people it had absorbed. The bones in the Neander Valley were not the remains of a failed species. They were the beginning of a story that ended inside you. Subscribe if you want the science that tells you what you actually are, not just where you think you came from. I'll see you in the next one.